So welcome to Baseball and Coffee. This is Tino, Aaron, and Matt. This is podcast number 2. We welcome in Matt. If you want to give a quick synopsis of who you are and your love for baseball and how long you've been doing it.
Sure. Let's see. Probably goes back to when I was younger. I like playing APBA baseball. I love following all the statistics. I was a big Montreal Expos fan and still am. Hope someday they come back. It's not the same liking the Nationals as with the Expos. Gary Carter, Tim Raines were my favorite players. I'm still looking for the next Gary Carter. Unfortunately, the catcher category hasn't been very strong. And I'm disappointed that steals are going down as well. But those are my 2 favorite players, Tim Rock Raines and Gary Carter. Anything else?
How long have you been playing fantasy?
I've been playing fantasy since 2001. And I think we started a keeper league in 2005. So this same group of the same core players have been playing since 2005.
Sweet.
So we're at 17 years now.
Awesome. I love it. I've been lucky enough to be a part of this group for a while. Some of them are incredible and most of them are incredible. There are a couple that have fallen off by the wayside, but I appreciate the welcoming to the group as well. Quick question for both of you guys, not on the script. Any interesting coffee stories from the week? Or what is your coffee setup at home?
I have a coffee story, but it's not a great one. So recently, within the last 3 months, I've transitioned to working nights for the first time in my working life. And when I get home from work, after working all night in the morning, I'm less than about 4 or 5 hours from quote bedtime, which is about 1 p.m. But I am just so ingrained and so just the warmth and the enjoyment of a cup of coffee in the morning, even though I'm working all night, it's just such a critical part of my routine. So I've been drinking decaf when I get home. I usually start a little mushroom superfood in there before my workout. But I'm not a decaf drinker. So I've been buying decaf for the first time in my adult life, but I just cannot go without that cup of coffee. But I don't want to have regular coffee less than 4 hours before I go to sleep. And so I went to buy a bag of coffee at a local coffee shop because I'm a Starbucks guy, but I'm not particularly a fan of decaf Verona. So I went to buy a bag of decaf coffee at a local coffee shop, and the clerk asked me if she'd like me to grind it. Sure. How are you going to brew it? I said V60 pour over. So she grinds it. I take it home. I get to the car. I'm like, that was $47 for a drink for Laura and I, and a bagel and a bag of that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem right. So I go back inside, and it's like 9 degrees. We just went to the farmer's market. It was freezing. So I go back inside. I'm like, Miss, can you put out a receipt? Because this just doesn't seem right to me. Turns out she charged me twice. It's all good, whatever. She refunded me. So the following morning, I get home from work, do this pour over. The grind is so fine. Like it barely would drop down. It was like a 6-minute drop. It was way too fine. So I call the coffee shop, like, hey, I bought this bag of coffee yesterday. The barista offered to grind it for me. It's way too fine for me. Can I bring it back in and get a credit or exchange? They were very nice about it. So I go in again, bring the coffee back. They were like, you know what? I took your phone call. I wanted to help you, but we don't have any more of that coffee. So we're just going to give you a full refund. So I ended up paying for 2 bags of coffee, refunding 2 bags of coffee, and I still don't have any decaf. So that's my coffee story.
That's rough. That's so rough. So real quickly at both home and my girlfriend's house, we have a standard like KitchenAid brewer with a metal basket and a baratza, and we just buy coffee from the local roastery, which is Walla Walla Roastery. and grind it at 18 on the Baratza, which is for a metal filter. Makes a really beautiful pot of brewed coffee. I have a Hario V60 ceramic cone that I will use on occasion and a Chemex, but brewing a pot of coffee for me and my girlfriend or at home is always a really beautiful way to go. Just wanted to share my own brew method. Matt, you got
I
anything
agree.
fancy besides the old Scottish breakfast McDonald's on the way into work?
You all are the experts. I'm just a spectator here when it comes to coffee. I'll do any coffee. I'm fine with that. It kind of goes along with baseball because I don't play baseball, but I enjoy it and like analyzing it. I don't make coffee and I suck at making coffee, but I like coffee. Same thing. I'm a religious studies teacher, and I'm not really much into practicing religion that strictly. So,
It sounds about right.
yep.
Love it. All right, so last week or this previous week in our league, we didn't have anything too major go on other than yesterday there was a trade of Kevin Gossman plus a round 12 for a round 2, which is the equivalent to a round 17 because we keep 15 players per team. Do you guys have any quick reactions to the Gossman trade?
My reaction was, again, I think as we mentioned offline this podcast, there's discussion about what do we think Osman's going to do in Toronto. I think that can be debated. From my eyes in this league, if Kevin Gossman was someone that I had identified as someone who was available on one of my fellow GM's rosters and I wanted him, I would rather secure him before the draft than see him go into the pool and then just having to hope he makes it to me. So I felt like based on the history of the draft, what kind of players go in round 17, as you astutely pointed out, I think that's about where he would go. So again, I think Kevin Gossman, this is a first base focused pod, so I'm not going to go into Kevin Gossman, but I thought, hey, if you like Kevin Gossman, you get him for a second round pick. That's probably what his price is going to be anyway. Go out and get him instead of waiting around and just hoping he makes it to you. That's how I feel about it.
Matt, any thoughts?
I see both sides here. You all know how I feel about starting pitching and how that compares to hitting as far as the value in a fantasy league, especially with the innings going down for SPs. The only concern I have for Gossman is going from San Francisco ballpark to Toronto and then going from the NL West to the AL East. So I think we'll see regression there. But I agree with Aaron. I like how our league identifies players they like and they go out and get them. So I'm not going to criticize any trade based on that.
That's interesting because I kind of have, I guess, a slightly contrarian point of view. I like Gossman a lot, especially in San Francisco, and I think he had a phenomenal year last year, but I worry, one, about his lack of track record in performing at that level, but also Toronto is such a hitter's park, and his surrenders a ton of home runs. And for someone that doesn't really truly have a slider, he's more kind of fastball, split finger. I worry about his giving up home runs in Toronto, pitching on turf, and also pitching in the AL East. I can't see him being much more than a high 3s ERA. Like, yes, he plays for Toronto, and I could see 15 wins, which is hugely valuable. But giving up, I don't see much upside him pitching for Toronto, and so giving up what was given up for him in the trade is, I don't think it was a bad trade necessarily, but I just don't see the same upside you guys do.
Yeah, I mean, to me, his K minus BV has been above 23%, for the fake 20 season in 2019 and then this past year, but that was all in San Francisco. But if he keeps that command and he puts a 23% K minus BB, and his expected home run to fly ball rate has been consistently in the 14 to 15% range his entire career. 14% of his league average. So he's just a tick above league average, and he's been there his whole career. So, Matt can speak better to the ballpark factors than I can, but, his home run rates have been pretty steady. It's really been the command was really what switched for him. The when he went from being someone who was disappointed because he had all these skills to someone who took that step, it was really the command. And to me, that's the most important thing. Can he hold that more so than the ballpark? But we'll see.
Mhm. And just to clarify, I'm more on the side of what Tino was saying as far as the move from the NL West to the AL East, and then the ballpark factor, and then the pitching element too. I would rather, if I had a keeper hitter that I liked, I would rather trade him for a second rounder and then get that pitcher in the second round.
Right. I would also argue that I think so his walk rate went down, and I think, and his K rate was higher than any other year other than 2020. But I would say that I don't know this to be true, but there's the potential for his walk rate to go down in San Francisco because he wasn't as worried about giving up home runs in San Francisco versus pitching in Camden Yards. Just to note too, his BABIP in 20 and 21 was 296 and 274. And then in 2019, it was 344, 18, 299, 17, 336, 16, 308, on and on. And then his left on base was above league average at 78.4 last year. So when I look at his batting average of balls in play, his left on base, some of the other metrics, I see room for regression, specifically moving from the NL West in San Francisco to the AL East and Toronto. He
struggled in the AL East when he came up. So
yeah, and that's a narrative I heard a lot, is him going back to the AL East and what that's going to do. And I think Tino brings up a good point of, can he mentally just put that behind him? Right. I don't have Savant pulled up because I have my data on the First Baseman pulled up, but I know he has two pitches that grade out as well above plus. And yes, the ballparks in the AL East are tough, and yes, they're tough lineups, but they also there's a lot of strikeouts to be had. Right. So I think with his 2++ pitches, there's a lot of swing and miss stuff.
Sure.
He's getting a lot of strikeouts and particularly some wins, but yeah, probably some higher ratios, and it'll be interesting to see how Gosman carries over his confidence of what he did in San Francisco back into those places where he hasn't had success. I think that's what's fun about our game, is we're not just, there is a human element, and we have to, we all kind of fall different places of whether we lean more into the data, projections, scouting, or the emotional elements of the game. But I think for sure these are human beings, and that's going to be a part of this for him as well. Is going back into places where he hasn't been successful.
Absolutely.
And the person that traded for him is the two-time champ out of the last 4 years. So I find that interesting too. I like to look at how players in our league take new strategies, and I think he's really weighing heavily towards pitching this year. So I'm quite curious on how that's going to work.
He also got pretty lucky, so we'll go ahead and leave it at that. So moving on to first base. Unless you guys have any other trades you want to discuss real quickly here, or offers that you may have gotten in the league that you want to discuss.
I don't, I did not get any offers, nor have I been close on anything since the Hayes trade. And forgive me, I don't remember how long ago that was. So
sweet. Matt, you good?
I'm good.
Good stuff. All right, first base, top 16 redraft. Are we all in agreement that Vladimir Guerrero is number one?
Yes.
Matt as well?
Oh, yes.
Is there any chance that he's not number one when we have this conversation next year?
No.
No, I don't believe so. Unless he has a catastrophic injury, but I can forecast that. He might not finish number one because it's baseball. Sure. But I think there's no way we're sitting here next year outside of the unforeseen circumstance with his health that he's not ranked number one again.
He's here by himself.
Is there any
absolutely, yeah.
So the only thought or concern I have like I fully expect 340 home runs, 100 runs, 100 RBIs. But is there any chance he, for lack of a better term, eats himself into a DH role?
I think there's a chance. I mean, he certainly showed a drive to manage his weight and get the most out of his athleticism, and his defensive metrics actually came up close to league average last year, depending on which one you look at. So he showed that ability again to be disciplined and get the most out of his athleticism despite his larger frame, and be at least a league average defender. So to me, he's answered that question, and now it's going to be the question is, can he hold it there?
Sure.
I at this point, again, I wouldn't be if I rostered him anywhere, which I don't, unfortunately. I would not be concerned about that right now.
I think that the coolest thing to me about him is his lack of strikeouts and just how hard he hits the ball. Like 12% walk rate, 16% K rate, 15% barrel rate, and 55% hard hit rate with a 95 mile per hour average exit velocity is just like, it's uncanny, right? And
it's
and
he's 22.
It's what we saw from his father before we had those an ability to measure those metrics. But I'm in awe. And
he has more patience than his father too.
He does. He's a better hitter.
And he went from 53% walks the case to 78 over last year.
I agree. He's tier one alone for me as a 22-year-old first baseman. I wish I had the guts to pick him up as early as those did in our league. Two, who do you guys have?
Tier two, I have in order Alonso, Freeman, and Goldie. That's my second tier. So I have Vladdy alone, 1, tier 2, Alonso, Freeman, Goldie.
Okay. And Matt?
We're doing regular redraft, right?
Correct.
I have Goldie, Freeman, and I'm going to move Votto up.
So you said Goldie, Freeman, and Votto?
Yes.
So my next tier is Freeman, Olsen, and Alonso. So we are in complete disagreement about who's in this next tier. We all said Freeman, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So Freddie Freeman last year, 300, 393, 896 OPS, 120 runs, 31 home runs, 83 RBIs, and 8 steals. He hit in the 2-hole quite a bit last year. He's been the model of consistency at first base. His launch angle did drop to 12%, which was the lowest of his career, but his hard hit percent was the highest of any full season at 45.7%. There is the possibility that Freddie Freeman ends up signing with someone else as he's a free agent, but everybody expects him to land in Atlanta. Is there any way he doesn't finish kind of within 5 or 10% of what he did last year?
Outside of an injury, I would say no.
So you're confident in his swing and kind of, his place within the organization and whatnot?
Absolutely. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine, even if he doesn't resign Atlanta, and if he's going to go somewhere that's going to be a contender, it's going to be a good club. He's going to be in the middle of the lineup. So, I don't have a lot of concern. He also seems like pros. I don't think he would be necessarily affected by being in a new place with a new contract. And looking at him closely, his expected stats were even better than what he posted. You could argue he had a bad year last year, and yet he was a preeminent producer. So, looking at the position, one of my biggest takeaway was that while we are not in a batting average league, we are in a league that categorizes hits. The biggest differentiator in the first base position was bats the ball and hitting. The baseline adjustment for hits was the largest among of all the 6 categories, because power almost comes with the position. So while that's his weakness, if you want to call it that, even though he's going to hit 30 to 35 home runs based on his quality of contact, his bat to ball and his average are second only to Vlad. So that really pushes him up in this tier and removes any doubt for me that that's where he belongs. Because again, he may give back some power to some of those other guys in this second tier, maybe even a few guys in the third tier. But his average and his hits are going to elevate him above most of the other players of his position. Again, outside of Vlad, I would fully expect him and Vlad to be the batting average leaders at this position, and that puts them at a much higher value in our game.
Is there any worry about where he hits in the lineup and what that might do to his statistics?
I mean, personally, if I rostered him, if he was going to be since he's a free agent, I would kind of be excited because I think he has a chance to hit lower in the lineup and drive in more runs. Like you said, he was hitting second a lot in Atlanta because of the position. They picked up the ball and Soler, and so they were batting those guys lower. And with Acuna being out, his RBIs went down, as you said, and that was just the batting order. So I'd be excited that his potential maybe land a little bit lower in the lineup where he could drive in more runs. Yeah, I mean, that's TBD. It's hard to say.
Right.
Yeah, I don't see any decline in skills. You have Vlad with obviously number one with hard contact and contact combined. And then you have Goldschmidt and Votto tied. And then you have Freeman just right after. So I don't see a decline there.
I guess my only worry is with Freeman is, again, where he hits in line. Say he resigns with Atlanta, which I think we all kind of expect. 120 runs is phenomenal, but 83 RBIs and fewer home runs from the first base position is I guess you can't call it suboptimal because there aren't a lot of guys that beat that. But when you compare the 83 RBIs to say Jose Abreu's 117, are you willing to take the hit in average and the hit and runs to pick up those RBIs? I think that's a question worth asking. But I think he's the consensus number 2 or 3 for us. Who did you guys have as?
I would want to add here too, if we're looking, since we are a head-to-head league and we're looking at consistency throughout the 22-week period before the playoffs, he's number 2 when it comes to usable weeks. So his distribution is consistent across the board. So you have Vlad at number 1, and you have Freddie Freeman at number 2 for usable weeks for the 4 main categories if we take steals away from first base.
Sure. And Aaron, you had Freeman at 3, is that right?
Correct.
So, and Goldschmidt was 2, correct?
4.
Who was 2 for you?
Alonso.
And why was Alonso 2?
Well, spoiler, Alonso was my riser.
Sure.
And this pains me because I do not like the Mets. I do not like his shtick and the way he carries himself. It annoys me. And he also is rostered by the team in our league who I despise. So it pains me. But when I looked at the data, I was taken aback by he's had a 3-year reduction, steadily declining in his K rate. Meanwhile, his zone contact rate has continued to go up. And his power is just, he's an upper 2%. 118 is max velocity, and his exit velocity on his flies and liners is exceptional, as is his barrel and hard hit rate. So when I see a guy who has that kind of power, who already has a season of 50 home runs on his young career, who is showing that he can reduce the strikeouts below 20%, and has that kind of power, and gives him some batting average floor, I feel like that was a profile that surprised me. I kind of saw him as a one-trick pony. He just mashed it. He's a masher. And when I looked at the stats a little bit deeper, I was like, there's more here. There's a batting average, and it was steady improvement. It wasn't just an outlier. So to me, I see someone based on the stats who's getting better and better at waiting for his pitch. He's getting better and better at when he gets his pitch, he's not missing it. And again, the power is off the charts. So when I see batting average floor with that kind of power, going into his peak season, age 27, he was my riser, and it gives me no pleasure to say that. I mean, his XOBP was 352, which again, that's not Vlad and Freeman range, but there's not many guys who are going to be any higher than that. So
what would make what makes Alonso your riser and at number 2 over Matt Olson?
Well, you're right on pace with me, Tino. I had Olson as my fade. It's not because I don't believe in the power, but he had his zone contact increased by 8%. And I just don't buy the 60%, the 16% K rate. And when I look at his spray chart, like, he is a dead pull hitter. And so I look for his strikeout rate to regress back closer to his career norms, but he'll hold some of the gains, but he's still going to be well over 20%. He's not going to post a good batting average as these other guys, potentially, again, because of his batted ball profile. He's a fly ball pull hitter, so those guys are going to post a lower average. It's not necessarily that I don't think the power is real, but again, going back to looking at this position, what gives you the most value is guys who have that bat to ball and can post a good batting average along with the power. Like, you have to have the power. That's a prerequisite at this position to be considered in the upper tier. So that's why I'm fading him. Again, he's my number 5, so I'm not like fading him way down. But I think from what I see and what he's looked at after the season he posted, he's thought of much higher than that. So whereas I'm looking at him and saying I would be pulling back on him. And if I rostered him, maybe I might be looking to trade him. Because opposite of Freeman, if he goes to a big market, if he gets traded, I kind of worry about how is he going to handle that, because he's kind of been in Oakland, they're a small market. I don't know his makeup, how that would affect him potentially, what kind of pressure. And then if he stays in Oakland, they're going to be a bad club. So that doesn't look great either. So he's my number 5. And I think obviously the power is real. I believe in that. And he can take a walk. He has an idea what he wants to do at the plate. But I see that contact regressing, and I don't think he's gonna. We might have already seen his career year.
So I guess so Matt Olson is my number 3.
Right.
What I might debate is I'm not in the business of understanding players' psyches enough to understand whether the move from Oakland to New York would actually impact them. What I do know is that the porch in right field in New York is shorter than the porch in Oakland, as is the foul territory. So I would expect, there's nothing definitive that says that his strikeout rate will remain at 17% when it was as high as 31% previously. Having watched him a lot as a Mariners fan and being in the AL West, what I saw from him was someone I was incredibly scared of when he came to the plate. His launch angle actually was reduced quite a bit from previous years. It was 16.2, whereas in 2020, it was 19.7, 19, it was 19.1, and 18, it was 18.1. So I think his approach at the plate was noticeably different than it was in previous years. And so that gives hope in maintaining his lowering of his strikeout rate, and his walk rate remained the same. I see a 27-year-old first baseman that hit for tremendous power, and I think has room for growth in the same way that Alonso does. I understand the hesitation because there was such a huge reduction in his strikeout rate, but that's a risk I guess I'm willing to take in Matt Olson. And I also, for better or worse, a sweet swinging left-handed first baseman makes me a little more comfortable than a right-handed hitting first baseman does. And whether that follows any sort of historical data or not, I trust Matt Olson more than I do Pete Alonso. Let's put it that way. Matt, do you have any thoughts on the two?
Yeah, so if I'm looking at contact plus hard hit, I see Goldschmidt, Freeman, and Votto in the same range, and then you have a fallout down to Alonso and Olson. I'm not sure how, I buy the short porch in New York, but I'm not going to work off that speculation. But I think that's a decent argument there. Yeah, so I really see a fall off there when it comes to both Alonso and Olsen, especially when what I'm looking for in first base in a head-to-head league is consistency across the board. Like, I don't want to get my butt kicked by somebody else because my first baseman is weak and doesn't distribute across the board. So I'm looking for hits, I'm looking for power, and I'm not going to compromise either. And in some ways, I'm looking for speed, not in the sense of anything, dropping in a steal here and there, but speed so that they could cover the runs issue. So I have questions about that, and that's where I even question myself with Votto and putting him so high. But this is redraft, so I have Votto at 4 here. But in Dynasty, I have Votto all the way down to 12 because he's only going to be, or even I would put him lower because he's just going to, when is he going to drop off? And that's always been the question with Votto. But he's still, there's no evidence that he's going to drop off in that ballpark with the position he's in and what he did to his swing last year.
Why are the adjustments that Votto made to his swing and his approach, which were more drastic than Matt Olson? Why are the changes that Votto made different than the changes that Olson made?
Because they show forth in the metrics quite a bit. So Olson's at 20% home run fly ball. Votto's at 26, which is pretty elite, especially in that ballpark. That would be something I would like. And you saw that increase with Votto last year, and you saw him being more aggressive as well. One of the things that bothered me about Votto, I owned him quite early in his career. You would get in these situations where it's first and third. I like watching games a lot and listening to them. First and third, and he walks.
Mm-hmm.
There's a runner in scoring position, and he walks. I just saw a lot more aggressiveness coming from him last year, and I don't see a reason why that would change.
Sure.
And I am pushing back on myself because my prior self 1 to 2 years ago would say, oh, Votto's going to drop off. Votto's going to drop off. But where do we draw the line there, right?
Sure.
In saying that.
So I guess for me, he hasn't hit more than 15 home runs since 2017. And he hit 36 last year. And we're assuming, based on your ranking, we're assuming he's going to hit at least 30 home runs. And even with the 36 home runs last year, he only scored 73 runs. The other thing is
I'll give you that.
His strikeout rate was 24%, and he hit 266. And heading into his age 38 year, I think there's the expectation that there's the potential for him to strike out a little more, which would reduce his average a little less. And I don't know that he has a ton of room for error given his lack of runs and his huge jump in home runs. So say he does regress slightly being a 38-year-old first baseman, then he's hitting 250 and he's hitting 30 home runs. He's scoring 65, 70 runs and driving in 80. To me, that's not worthy of a top 5 rank, whether it's dynasty or redraft. I think, again, someone like Olsen or someone like Alonso provides much more of a safety net and a bit more upside. Than
I would give you Alonso, but I'm still skeptical with Olsen when it comes to skeptical when it comes to him and the assumptions we have about where he's moving.
Sure. But I would give you that in 2019, Matt Olson hit 267 and his OPS was 896 and he had 36 home runs and 91 RBIs. So essentially had the Joey Votto year in 2019 when we all thought that that there was too much swing and miss, right? So if you take his last full year and you compare it to what Votto did last year, I think a lot of it is perception. A lot of it is expectation. And the fact that Votto made such a jump, I think, changes our perception in how great that year was, when in reality, it was almost the exact same year that Matt Olson had in 2019.
Your comment on who owns whom. I would rather have Votto in this year than Vaughn.
I think Vaughn is such a wild card. It's I don't even have Vaughn in my top 16 for redraft. I don't really know. I do have him at 6 in Dynasty. We can get to that a little bit later. What I'm interested in is where you guys have Goldschmidt. Aaron,
Yeah, I have him 4.
do you see him putting up seasons like he did last year for the next couple of years?
You know, I wanted to fade him. It was a little ageism on my part. It's a little bias. St. Louis is not a team that I particularly am passionate about. It's a bad ballpark, you know, and his age 34, I wanted to fade him. But when I looked at the season that he posted and the underlying skills, you know, he increased his own contact. He had a career high walk rate, career high hard hit rate. He increased his fly ball rate. So I saw nothing in the skills that gave me pause to, you know, to move him back. Which I was inclined when I started this process of, you know, he doesn't belong that high, but you know, his ISO was 220, you know, his OBP was 365, his exit fly ball on his exit velocity on his flies and liners is almost 97 miles an hour. So when he not only was he lifting the ball, he was doing it with power. You know, 13.6% barrel rate. You know, he's going to hit in the middle of that lineup every single day, and he runs a little bit, despite the fact that he's in the back half of his career. So I just didn't see anything. So I have him as my last first baseman in the second tier, which reflects, I think, my lack of excitement about him. But honestly, it's not because of his performance. I think it just, again, I didn't go into this being excited about him. That's one of the things that challenges me about this process, honestly, is having to evaluate these guys outside of my normal, just these are the guys I like, these are the guys I don't like. So.
Does his batting average of balls in play worry you at all? He's a 331 BABIP last year.
Not really, because the quality of contact was so good.
Say he comes down off of 294 to about 275, 270. Does that change things? Because for me, I actually had Jose Abreu at 5 and Goldschmidt at 6. My reasoning being the number of RBIs that Abreu has posted consistently year after year, for me, is worth the slight drop in average and OPS. Obviously, based on your rankings, you'll take the steals and the contact over that. But does that impact
hard contact too? So
sure.
So Abreu's at 114 hard contact versus, you know, alongside contact, and you have Goldschmidt at 131. So there's quite a difference there.
Mm-hmm. I guess for me, this might
with linear power at 99, and then you have Goldschmidt at 141. So that's quite a difference there as well.
So if I rewind a little bit and I just think about, like, as a scout, as opposed to looking at the numbers, which we all have in front of us. When I think about these two first basemen, I see Abreu as a very, very traditional run producer. My comp to him in my blog is Pedro Guerrero. And I think of him as someone who, if you have runners on base and Abreu comes up, it doesn't matter what his metrics say. It doesn't matter how hard he's going to hit the ball. You have confidence that he's going to drive that guy in. The White Sox were number 7 in the major leagues in runs scored last year. And for me, again, I find RBIs a really difficult stat to fill at other positions. And the fact that he's driven in 100 runs, I believe it's 6 out of the last 7 years, other than the COVID 2020, or might be 5 out of 6. But to me, that's worth, in a head-to-head league, that's worth more than the bump in steals that I would get from Goldschmidt. But I guess I'm the outlier in that.
Yeah, to me, I'm not looking at it in terms of steals. That's not the differentiator. I know that I might get that from him, but for me, I think they're similar type players in that they're floor players. You can rely on them, and they're accumulators. And I agree with you. I like the White Sox lineup better. He's going to have more opportunities. The reason I have Goldschmidt higher is simply his quality of contact and then just the quality of his batted balls. Even I have him projected at 279 batting average, so I don't have him projected at 300 again. Whereas Abreu, I have Abreu at 265.
Sure.
So
just for reference, Steamer.
On that argument, Tino, I would agree with you. If we look at the consistency of how they've performed week to week, you have Vlad at 1, Freeman 2, Goldschmidt 3, Olsen 4, and then Abreu 5, and then there's a big gap. So Abreu, I like the definition or like how you categorized him as a solid, consistent floor player, because across the board, everything but home runs, he's top notch when it comes to even runs. He's had over 50% of usable weeks with runs, 14 out of 22 with RBI, and batting average of over 50% when it comes to that.
So when it comes to so for tier 2, you guys have, is it 3 players each in tier 2?
Yes.
I have 3 players in tier 2.
And they are Freeman, Alonso, and Goldschmidt for both of you?
For me, it was Goldschmidt, Freeman, and Votto.
Got it. So my tier 2 was Freeman, Olsen, and Alonso. Tier 3, or my number 5 first baseman, was Abreu. And then I had 6 and 7 are Goldschmidt and Votto. We've talked about those guys. Who do you guys have at, I guess if you have somebody different, 6 and 7, go ahead and speak now.
I have Alonso and Olsen at 6 and 7.
Okay.
I have 5 and 6, I should say.
And Aaron?
Votto and Abreu.
So who do you have at 8? This is where it gets interesting.
Yeah. So this is the end of my tier 3. So my tier 3 went Olsen to lead it off. That's the best option in this tier. For me, the difference between tier 2 and tier 3 was batting average and the combination of quality and contact and with power. So Olsen is that next tier, starts at the top of the next tier. Votto, Abreu, Schwarber, and Hoskins. I have Schwarber and Hoskins in that tier because of their elite power, but this is where the batting average at the position starts to fall away.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Matt?
I have Alonso, Olsen, and this one's fully dependent upon health, Muncy, and then Abreu altogether.
Mm-hmm. So I do think we had some classification differences. I did not include Muncy or Schwarber. I'll include Schwarber as an outfielder in all likelihood, and Muncy at second. At 8, 9, and 10, I guess I would include 8, 9, 10, and 11 in the same tier for me. 8 was Belt, 9 was Josh Bell, 10 was Hoskins, and 11 was Jared Walsh. I guess I'll say now, obviously Belt's 2021 kind of speaks for itself. And if you can assume some health, a little bit of regression, but some health and the ability to platoon him a little bit, you're looking at a 13% walk rate and a lot of power. And then I guess the surprising one, or the one I should explain, is Josh Bell. He's my riser amongst first basemen. We all know that he was a slight disappointment in 2021. He had a 53.5% ground ball rate, which is pretty horrendous. His launch angle went from 13.1 in 2019 to 4.9% in 2021. So he hit basically everything on the ground. And even then, he still had 27 home runs and a 118 WRC plus. His 11% walk rate was in the 81st percentile, and his 18% K rate was in the 73rd percentile. His barrel rate obviously was low at 9%, but his hard hit rate was 52%, which ranked him in the 93rd percentile. And his exit velo and average exit velo were in the 96th and the 92nd. So to me, if I can get a hitter that had 27 home runs last year and 75 runs, 88 RBIs, and the 823 OPS with tremendous upside, and the history of a year that was much better than that 2 years ago, to me, he has tremendous potential, and I would take him over many of the proven commodities, including Rhys Hoskins and Yuli Gurriel. What do you guys think?
I have him ranked very similarly. He's my number 10 first baseman. He's the top of my fourth tier, along with Jared Walsh. I like Bell better than Jared Walsh because of his plate skills and walk rate and his ability to control the strike zone. His xFOB last year was 362. The reason why I don't have him higher, despite his ability to barrel the ball and his hard hit rate, because he actually barrels the ball just above league average, it is the inconsistency with his launch angle, as well as he's a switch hitter. And what I saw happen was teams are bringing left-handers to face Soto, and then that would then enforce to turn Bell to the right side, and that's his weaker side. So a lot of times in big spots, he ends up hitting from his weaker side because he's always behind Soto. He doesn't run well, so his BABIP is going to run low. And to me, I think he has tremendous skills when he's going well. He's shown himself to be streaky, and that's why I have him 10th and not higher. I agree with you on everything you said about the skills. And again, I love the walk rate. I love that he controls his zone. He gets on base, but he's not a good runner, and he's streaky. And I don't like where again, where I see him consistently getting flipped to his weaker side in big spots. But he had a good season last year and a nice run to end the year, but he's just streaky. He's up and down. And I think, if you are okay with that, you're going to get a good player.
How about you, Matt?
After Abreu, so Abreu I have at 8. There's quite a fall off for me. When it comes to a redraft league, this is where I want to start to gamble on players with high upside that could make a difference. But I have Bill around the same place you do. I think I have him at 10 because he does provide that floor in that territory. So it depends on the other players I have, but if I was taking risks in other areas, Bell would be the next player I went to. And I think, yeah, his hard hit along with contact skill was great. His power was consistent. I agree with what Aaron was saying as far as him being a streaky player. The switch hitting element is not is sometimes a downside as far as teams wanting to turn him around. But this is where I would take risks with players like a Vaughn, or even somebody in Colorado like Crone, or even a Ty France if he could get his power switched around. But France's hard hit and contact is supreme. So I see him more as a riser there. But again, this is risk territory for me when it comes to redraft. And I would really aim to get one of those eight people we basically all agree on as far as being the 8. And then if I wasn't able to, and if I had solid positions, I would start taking risks with the Vaughn types,
Sure.
Even with the Torque types. He may be coming up at some point. Is it Mountcastle or Montcastle? I'm not sure.
Mountcastle.
Mountcastle, yeah. That's a fun risk there. The only downside there is what Baltimore is going to do with left field. But again, he's ALS. ALS. He's AL East, so he's going to be in some parks where no matter where he's positioned, he's going to knock some out. So yeah, this is the risk-taking area for me. Sure. I'm not as high on Walsh as Aaron is. just because I'm afraid of number one, the Angels, and number two, the platoon element with Walsh, and his lack of consistency.
If they had any more good players, I'd be worried
Yeah,
about
yeah,
that too.
exactly. That's the goes back to the one with the Angels, right?
Interesting, because I have Walsh as my faller. I saw an 8% walk rate, which put him in the 40th percentile, and a 26% K rate. His chase rate was 34%, which is in the 19th percentile, and his hard hit was 41% in the 52nd percentile. He did have a good max exit at 115, but his BABIP was 335. And I could see a situation where with a 335 BABIP and a 277 average, very easily you could see him regress and come down to, 260, even 255, which is not, obviously is not the kind of first baseman that you might want. Interestingly, Steamer predicted him for 33 home runs and an 824 OPS. And so Steamer sees a good season from him. But a player who's a late bloomer with a low walk rate, a high K rate, that chases a lot of pitches outside of the zone and a questionable hit tool is not a first baseman that I'm going to target in any league, let alone a 16-team redraft.
Plus, hard hit contact is 105. That's just 5 up from the league average, and that compares with somebody like Nate Lowe.
Right. Aaron, do you have any thoughts on Walsh other than ranking him at 10?
I had him at 11,
Yeah.
just after Bell, and then before my last tier.
Mm-hmm.
He's interesting. The 26% K rate I don't like. It's a lot. That's part of his game though, as is struggling against lefties.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, I saw the same things in terms of projected for an 827 OPS and a 123 WRC plus with 30 plus homers.
Mm-hmm.
And he also has first base and outfield eligibility. So we haven't talked a lot about eligibility, which is fine. But yeah, he not a player that I would target, but I think if he's able to build on what he's done so far, it could be helpful fantasy season.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't disagree with what you said about the risk. And again, I think if they had anyone else, they would probably platoon him. If he played in Tampa, there's no way he'd play every day.
Right. So my last 5 are in a redraft are 12 is Torkelson, 13 Gurriel, 14 Bobby Dahlbeck, 15 is CJ Cron, and 16 is Miguel Sano. Torkelson, I just think, how quickly do you think he's going to come up? What position do you think he's going to play? Because he's more valuable probably as a third baseman. And how quickly do you think he's going to hit? Obviously, ranking him at 12, I think that even if you get 350 at-bats from him, he's going to be better than the players below. Yuli Gurriel he's a hard guy for me to draft. I know that, he's a consistent run producer. He's a really good hitter. He's almost Jose Abreu light in some ways, in that you can count on him being a good hitter and driving runs in. He's just not my cup of tea. I certainly have to evaluate my Houston Astros bias in ranking him at 13, but he's not a player that I would be taking. Dalbec at 14 is a bit of a lottery ticket, but it's incredibly difficult to ignore a 20% barrel rate and a 116 max exit velocity and 92 mile per hour average exit velocity from a young first baseman. He could hit 40 home runs and no one would blink an eye. He does strike out a ton and doesn't have that track record yet, which is why he's at 14. Cron is at 15. We all know he's the Colorado Rockies first baseman. His home and away splits are pretty horrendous. Hit a 1.073 OPS at Coors and a 734 OPS away from Coors. My preference would be to have Cron and another, say you had Cron and Walsh, you could platoon the two and start Cron at home, specifically against lefties. But he's not a full-time first baseman as far as I'm concerned. And then 16 is Sano. He hits the ball too hard to ignore, and his prospect pedigree is too hard for me to ignore, but he's certainly a lottery ticket. If I picked any of Dalbec, Cron, or Sano, I would be pairing them with, Bell, Hoskins, Bell, Walsh, or one of those tiered first basemen. How about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is take your shot territory. My last five, I have two guys who are volume guys, Cronin and Mancini, both who have their flaws, but should see more at bats than a lot of the other guys outside of Gurriel below on this list. So they have their flaws, but they will be more of an accumulator potentially, albeit probably hurting your ratios. And then I have Gurriel similar at 14. He doesn't bring the power, but he does bring elite contact. And he bats in the bottom, they're kind of middle, second, third of that lineup. He swings at everything, but he makes a lot of contact as well. So to me, in your team construction, if you have power, say you have maybe a Brandon Lowe at second base, and I'm trying to think of a shortstop who could hit 35 home runs. You have that kind of pop maybe up the middle. You could take maybe a Gurriel at first, and be able to not, because you're giving away a lot of power at first base to roster him. But again, he's gonna help you in hits and average, and should be a decent contributor and runs. I don't think you can ignore him. And then my last two, I know you guys mentioned some young guys. I agree. This is kind of take your shot zone. I have Kirilloff at 15 and Tellez at 16. And the reason I highlighted those guys is they have low 20%, and then the low 20s on their K rate, and their their exit velocity on their fly balls and liners was 96 and 96.2 respectively, which is excellent. That's up in the Goldschmidt, Votto type range for that kind of quality of contact on fly. So that tells me that they have the ideal launch angle. Both of them have barrel rates well above league average, and they're again only striking out less than 20% of the time. So, Rowdy's been around the block, but Milwaukee's a great place to hit. And I think if he gets to see legs under him, I wouldn't be surprised to maybe see him finally take that step. And with his power and plate skills, I think that's intriguing enough to be my number 16. Obviously, Kirilloff, it's more of a health question than a talent question. But again, I was very encouraged by what I saw, despite him again battling through some injuries. So I would love to take a shot on him in that range as well. So that was how my list rounded out.
Yeah, I agree with the Sano, so I won't continue with that, the Sano commentary there. The two risers that I have in this category would be Ty France and Kirilloff. So first with France, we see the increase of OPS in the second half, and I had him on my team before I started going even younger than 26, 27. But France was dealing with a wrist injury for the whole first half, and I think that is often forgotten, and that contributed to his lack of power at the start. But some of his contacts with velocity is elite there. So his it's 122, so 22 above league average when it comes to hard hit with contact. His home run to fly ball is quite interesting as well, because again, you're dealing with the launch angle problem and the wrist problem. So that was at 12%, but I would expect that certainly to go up next year. So France is an interesting one, and Kirilloff is, again, this goes back to my value of first base. I want somebody that's going to hit the ball hard and make a lot of contact. Most of his minor league career, he was in the 80s when it comes to contact rate, which is elite, and high batting average and so forth. And I'm not going to put the injuries against him there. And the way Minnesota grows up hitters as well brings me a lot of confidence in him. So he's a riser for me. So I had him right after Bell when it comes to kind of these risky players. I had Vaughn in the same area as well, just dealing with talent. I still use Baseball America for these younger players, right? So Kirilloff is 70 hits, 60 power, most recently from Baseball America. and scouts and front offices, and they have Vaughn at anywhere from 70 hit to 60 power as well. So I would roll the dice with those two, and then even Ty France when it comes to these later first basemen in redraft leagues.
Yeah, France is interesting to me because he's first and second eligible. He's projected for a 795 OPS. And certainly, if he has the power, increase that you're maybe seeing for him, that's going to be higher. But he would be below replacement level with a 795 OPS at first, but he would be an asset at second with that kind of power. So it'd be kind of interesting study there whether you want to utilize him at first or second from a construction standpoint.
I have him rated as a second baseman, mostly because I assume that I would utilize him at second before I would at first, but I agree with with your assessment of him as a player for sure. Let's quickly go through our top first base from a dynasty perspective. Let's start with everybody's, I guess, top 5. Go ahead, Aaron.
Wow, making me go first on the prospects. All right.
No, the dynasty.
Oh, no prospects. Honestly, I wouldn't really change mine. I would just probably drop off Mancini and Crone, and then just add in Torkelson and Casas. In that sort of 10 to 11 range. I thought about it, and I don't think I would really change it that much. Our conversation last week, about catcher and about thinking about the next 3 to 4 years, and really evaluating the way I look at these players when I'm trying to rank them. If those 2 young guys were up today or this time next year, I think that's where I'd put them, and I'd drop a couple of those accumulators out and then put them in that sort of like 8 to 10 range. That's the adjustment I would make for today for those guys. And that would be, again, Torkelson and Casas would be the only 2 I would add to my list. And I would drop off Crone and Mancini, who are just kind of accumulators, not very interesting guys.
How about you, Matt? Did we lose you?
He's offended at my lack of enthusiasm for prospects at first base.
So I'll go ahead and share my first base dynasty. I actually did change mine quite a bit. My number 2 would be Spencer Torkelson. I think
never heard of him.
I think he's going to be a consistent 290 hitter with 30, 35 home runs the minute he comes up to the major leagues. I don't quite understand why he's not there already. He's someone that I probably would have brought up last year, if nothing else, but to sell tickets. Torkelson's 2, Olsen is 3. I'm obviously the high man on Matt Olsen, but he's 27 years old. And if he can continue to hit 35 home runs and walk the way that he does and hit 260 or so, I don't see any reason why he's not the number 3. Freeman is 4. Obviously consistency, expecting to tail off a little bit, but I don't see his swing going away anytime soon. He's a bit younger than some of the others. I have Alonso at 5. I think there's more variability in the potential career path of Alonso than there might be in some others. The next 2, 6 and 7, are Andrew Vaughn and Tristan Casas. Vaughn, I'm just a believer. I think he's a 300 hitter with 25 to 30 home runs. I understand his struggles against right-handers last year, but I think that's pretty typical of a young right-handed hitter. I believe he'll figure it out. His other metrics say that he will, and he's going to mash lefties. He's in a great offense that'll be great for years. I think he's a really, really, really good hitter, quality hitter. Casas has more power, more swing and miss. I don't know him as well, but I do understand his pedigree, and I think he's my number 7. Goldschmidt is 8. I could see a tail off in Goldschmidt over the next 2 years or so. Given our conversation last week, Goldschmidt to me is maybe 2 more years of good production and then a fall off, not 3 or 4. Bella's 9. I just think he's going to fix it and have 3 or 4 years of productivity. Abreu's 10. Dalbec is 11. Hoskins 12. Nick Prado is 13. I don't know if today I would rank him at 13. I did these rankings last week. The more that I read about him, the more I'm not sold. Walsh 14, Belt 15, and Mancini was 16. I guess just the big headliners there would be Torkelson as high as he is, and then Vaughn as high as he is. But I don't think it's going to take long for those guys to ramp up and be good to go. Matt, you're back.
All right.
like it.
So you would like this better, I'm kind of Jekyll and Hyde when it comes to head-to-head in redraft versus dynasty. So I have Vlad, obviously 1, Olsen 2, Alonso 3, Torkelson 4, Freeman 5, Goldschmidt. I still think there's stuff in Goldie for a few more years. Kirilloff 7, Vaughn 8, Cassis 9. Cassis is interesting because he really hasn't shown his power yet. He's an interesting kind of up and down as far as where he went, right? So across the minors and then onto the Olympic team and then back. And he really wasn't able to show much of his power. So much so, I think his home run to fly ball was 9% in AAA. His eye, though, his walks to Ks are amazing, 78%, AA, at 1-to-1 ratio in AAA. His contact is at 76. His exit philosophy. I'm doing the same thing. Just for everybody here, I make a lot of mistakes in text messages. I guess I'm doing some speaking mistakes here today. But I like the idea of exit velocity. But exit velocity is at 89, so he's not up with the elites of like Kirilloff, Vaughn, and Torque. Torque is elite at 91 in the minors. So yeah, that's he's an interesting player there. I do have going back to my list, I have Vargas at 10, just because he's
On your team?
Yeah, he's on my team, exactly. But it's a chicken and egg thing, right? I'm following where the scouting is going. But Baseball America and Prospectus have him at 60. Prospectus itself said he's the ideal number 3 hitter. What's amazing about him, his exit velocity is not there yet. His contact rate is elite when it comes to the minors. His swinging strike rate is up there with Vlad in the minors. His contact rate is 83% on average in the minors, and he's starting to elevate the ball and pull the ball, which was quite an increase this year. And plus he's in a system that's going to continue to encourage that. And I think the Dodgers, when you start moving to AAA to the pro team, it's going to change now. You had that blockage with Lux and so forth, but I think the players are getting older. Muncie's hurt. You have Red at third, Turner getting old. I think there's these prospects are going to start coming up for the Dodgers. So I really like Vargas. The other interesting thing about him as well is his ground balls to fly balls in the minors. He's not grounding out much at all when it comes to what you would expect from this type of contact hitter. What happens from here, I'm going to look very carefully at spring, obviously, and into AAA as he moves to AAA, but he's one of my risers. I do have to keep putting Muncie in here because of his elite skills that aren't falling off at all. And I'll put a shout out for Votto here as well. I have Votto, I think 13 on my dynasty. I wouldn't do it if I were building with youth, but if I were contending in a dynasty, I would certainly want him on my team. Ty France, obviously, I will have him there, and Bell as well. So those are some of the ones towards the end.
Interesting, the difference in philosophies, because I don't know that our player evaluation is demonstratively different across the board, but the way in which we view dynasty and the way in which we rank our players certainly is a bit different. I think that it's, Aaron, as you alluded to earlier, I tend to think about, okay, what do I get for the next 3 or 4 years from this player? And because I don't know that in a dynasty league, other than the most elite prospects, we can actually guarantee that we're going to have them for that long, other than, maybe counting on their trade value. But if they do perform well over 3 or 4 years, and you can make the choice then as to whether to trade them or to keep them, to me, if they give you that amount of production, then you can start to consider them as a part of this list. But it's just interesting to hear you guys' perspective, and I appreciate how different the three of us approach this. Matt, I also find it interesting that you have your own players ranked so high. I would like to
Get his chicken and egg.
I just like to point that out a little bit.
Chicken and egg, my friend.
Yeah, well, I will enjoy when Casas is Billy Ashley 2.0. So real quickly, just for the sake of time, do you guys have, if you're heading into a redraft, what's your first base philosophy or strategy given the players that we have? Aaron, if you want to go first.
Yeah, I think for me, looking at this player pool and how valuable what Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is doing and is at this position and how far he is above in his own tier, I think I would, if I look at the other players at other positions who have that sort of tier one, a lot of them have a little bit of risk associated with them. He does not, in my opinion. So I would, if I had an opportunity to draft him in the first round, I would definitely do that. And then after that, I think similar to catcher, I want a good first baseman. I think it's really hard to be competitive in the home run, RBI, and in our league OPS categories. I don't know what categories you want to focus on for this discussion, but it's very hard to be competitive if you don't have the competitive, power and production at the corners. So it would be proud for me. I would put my cutoff, after Abreu. I really wouldn't want to, and Abreu is my seventh first baseman. So I would not want to be working in the pool below that as my only first baseman. If I want to set it and forget it every day, I want one of those 7 guys. And like you said, when you start talking about, Walsh and Gurriel, pairing them together, those kind of things, or, taking a flyer on a Gurriel, or excuse me, a Kirilloff or a Vaughn and pairing them with someone who gets steady playing time. You start doing that later in the draft if the plan doesn't come together. But ideally, again, I would try to get Vlad after coming out of this study, and then if I couldn't do that, I would want one of my top 7.
How about you, Matt?
Same here. Vlad, I would definitely grab. And then you have those 7 that I think we all more or less agree on that we would that I would go for in a draft. Again, first base is important to me to keep up with my opponents in head to head. It's not huge for me to have a big difference.
All right, we're back.
We're back. So yeah, so I would with redraft, I would want somebody in those. I wouldn't necessarily strive for Vlad. If Vlad falls to me, that would be great. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
Did you hear me what I said before?
Yes.
Okay. So Vlad falls to me, great, but I would want somebody in those next 7 just so I could keep up. I want to look for positions to differentiate myself besides first base. This is a keep up category with me when it comes to head. But Vlad, if he falls to me, I'd take him.
I agree with the top 7. I don't know that my desire to pick one of them would beat out 7 other managers. I would see a situation where maybe for me it would be like Bell and Torque, or Bell and Vaughn, or Bell and Dahlback, something like that. I agree that trying to keep up with most of the production at first is the way to go. And unless you have, say you have a Tatis or a Devers or, an Acuna or someone like that, that is far and away better than most of the other players at their position. I do think it's important to keep up at first, but not at the cost that it might be to take, say, an Alonso or a Freeman or a Goldschmidt or an Olsen in those top couple of rounds. I would pay a lot of, if I didn't get one of those guys, I would pay a lot of attention to where in the lineup my other players hit, and the offenses in which they play, because I would know that RBIs are going to be at a premium if I don't get them from one of those top first basemen there. You guys have any other thoughts around first base strategy?
Yeah, it's interesting to me, and we've become so hyper focused on speed, at least in the redraft world. I don't know that we talk about it as much in dynasty in our builds there from a long-term perspective, but in the redraft world, it's such a topic of conversation, and ADP and mocks and and all these things. But to me, if you can add a floor of production like what Vladimir Guerrero Jr. offers, it's you can find players who have speed later at other positions, and it's not, I would make that trade-off, but
Sure.
it's just interesting because most people in the first round are trying to get someone who can be a cornerstone that gives them speed, and to me, I would not eliminate him because he wouldn't bring that.
Sure, it might allow you to draft someone like a Miles Straw, or in previous years, a D Gordon or a Billy Hamilton or someone like that, to be able to make up that category. I assume that's what you're saying.
No, I'm just saying you could this arguing I have with Matt, but you find a second baseman who sells 15, a shortstop who sells 10,
Sure.
a couple of outfielders, maybe an outfielder gets 20, another one gets 10. You could be competitive without rostering a Trey Turner or Jose Ramirez or something like that.
Sure.
And you would be bringing a hammer on batting average and OPS versus 90% of the league at a very important position.
Right. That makes sense. All right. So the last category we have before we have our open forum questions is first base prospects. I know, Aaron, you were going to bring 5 to the table. Do you want to go ahead and get started with that?
Yeah, for sure. Real quick before I ask this, I just want to clarify. So Tino, am I hearing correctly? You like Dahlbeck better than Casas? Is that correct?
I don't. I
Okay.
have Dahlbeck at 11 in my dynasty rankings and Casas at 7.
Oh, okay. Forgive me.
But I have Dahlbeck at 14 in my redraft, and Casas is not rated in the redraft.
Gotcha. Okay. I must have just missed it when you mentioned Casas. I heard you mention Dahlbeck and I just missed it. So I was curious about that. So I have some guy named Spencer Torkelson, number 1, and then the aforementioned Casas at 2, Mason Martin at 3, Dustin Harris at 4, and Tyler Soderstrom at 5. So proximity was after Torque, who I'm not going to speak about that. You guys have already spoken about that, and I have too much skin in the game to really be objective anyway. So the other thing I was looking at after him was really just proximity, as well as bat to ball and plate approach, as well as power, because that's, to me, that's where it starts. If I'm going to take a stake on a first baseman, he has to bring the hit tool. If I'm going to invest in a first baseman and put him in my minor league spot, he better be able to have an idea at the plate, draw a walk, he better be able to make a lot of contact, and he better bring power. Otherwise, I'm not interested in rostering him at that position and holding on to him. So Cass is a 55 on Fangraphs for hit tool, 55 for eye, and has a 60 game and 70 raw. So he meets that criteria, and he should debut this year. Mason Martin was third for me because he has, again, a 60 grade eye, 50 grade hit tool, is a little lower on hit, but a 60 game and 70 raw. So brings the power to the table, and he has a chance to play this year. The Pirates need guys who can play. He should get every opportunity to see what he can do at the highest level. He has impressive power. His hard hit and max EV are second only to Torkelson. 4 and 5 for me. I'm looking, these guys are farther away. So again, I'm looking for guys with hit tool and power. I have Dustin Harris at 4 because if there's anything we know, we can't go wrong betting on Texas Rangers. But his eye was rated 55, back control of 60. That's, you don't see many 60s assigned to first base unless your name is Torkelson. And then his raw power is a 60, and he flashed to 50 speed. So maybe like a Goldie type. Might be interesting to take a flyer on in 6 months or so. And then I think we mentioned last time in the catcher pod, Soderstrom, both his bat control and his pitch selection are rated by a 60 on Fangraphs. With a 60 raw power as well. So I think he has a chance to be a really special hitter, but we don't really know where he's going to play. We think he might end at first. I put him in my first base prospects. I definitely don't think he'll stick at catcher because they need guys who can play, and we know it takes longer to get catchers to the majors. So I think his bat will get moved. So I have him at first. I don't know that I would roster Harris or Soderstrom unless, I was just taking all on prospects, but those are guys that I would rank 4 and 5 in terms of interest for me based on where their tools are projected to be.
Awesome. How about you, Matt?
All right. So obviously Torque at 1, Cassis at 2. We've already discussed him. Already discussed Vargas at 3. And just so you know, that's not just me. That's Baseball America and Prospectus. So I would have Torque in his own tier, and then Cassis and Vargas in the next tier. And then the next tier starts with Prado and Pasquantino, both for KC. And then I have a drop off there, partly based upon proximity, partly based upon the way their skills are being rated by scouts right now. Dustin Harris, Noel, Blaze Jordan, kind of in their own territory. And then these two late bloomers, if you want to call it 24, 25-year-old late bloomers. You got Yepes at 9. I'm not sure what's going to happen with his position. And then I have Beer at 10, not only because of name, but he hit the crap out of the ball when he came up and unfortunately got hurt right then. But I like him as an Arizona hitter, and the DH aspect may come into play for Beer's future potential.
So I'm pretty much in line with you, Matt. I've got Torkelson, Casas, Vargas, Prado, Harris. I agree. I like the speed from Harris. He had a bunch of steals last year. Noel, big power, potentially at third base. Pasquantino feels like your prototypical lefty platoon, high OBP, good hitter, can't hit a slider from a left-hander. I have Jordan, Yepes, Beer, and then Anthony Garcia from the Yankees and Starlin Aguilar from the Mariners. I don't have a lot to add outside of, I do think there's value in discussing or evaluating some of these players like Yepes that might not have a position, but might end up eligible at multiple positions. And so he's too slow and stiff really to play regularly anywhere else, which is why he ended up at first base. But he's not tall, right? He's not your prototypical first baseman, but if he has eligibility at first, second, and third as an example, and he obviously has a lot of power, then he becomes like Chris Taylor or Ben Zobrist or one of those types of players that obviously provide tremendous value in a dynasty league. So I do question some of the thought, or I guess the process around not ranking and thinking about those players, even though they've fallen on the defensive spectrum as much as they have. Yepes, I would even consider, as good of a hitter as he is, I would consider moving him up slightly because of proximity and because of his potential availability at other positions. Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
I agree with that, and I'll give you first name, last name, Jake Cronenworth, right? So you have somebody that's kind of in that position that San Diego reached out to Tampa Bay for, that really wasn't on anybody's radar, and all of a sudden he showed up in 2020 and raked. He provides multiple positions, multiple categories when it comes to his consistency. So I could see Yepes as that type of player. Now the question is this a keepable player?
Right.
To me, these type of players are really good for having and then trading when the hype finally reaches its climax, and trying to find that point is very key.
I agree. I don't know that I would have the guts to roster one of these prospects. I certainly probably would not, and even to keep one of them, as valuable as they might be, they might not be a keeper for me. We had a debate offline about Chris Taylor and his keepability in a 15 keeper league. But I do think that when you're looking at top 10 prospects, it's worth mentioning players like that may not have a position, but definitely have a bat.
I have a question for you.
Can I get a copy of that podcast?
Absolutely.
I'm gonna need to hear that.
This has to do with a player that I have that I go back and forth on, and that's Prado. So he has amazing stuff, yet some very, very cautioning data as well. So you know, his linear power, even if you go to Baseball Forecaster and look at his linear power index, that's at 173. That's beyond elite, right? Even as they categorize that from AAA into majors. And the raw score is 27.2. So linear power being, you know, triples, doubles, home runs, and so forth. Home run to fly ball rate as he moved into AAA was 31%. Exit velocity was up close to the elite there. But then this is where it gets weak with his contact rates, right? And his strikeouts. What he strike out 159 times total. His contact rate was 62%. But then you go to his eye, which was 58 in double A and 48% in AAA. So he did walk a lot. So he's kind of this player that goes up and down, up and down, up and down when it comes to the metrics. So I want to hear your takes on him.
There's just a lot of, for me, there's a lot of risk in his hit tool, and too much for me. I've seen the same metrics you have. I understand that there's tremendous power there. I do like that he's a good athlete and he's not just a big goofy slugger. I tend to like those profiles a little bit more. And I do like that he takes a walk. I don't have, even though I have traded for MJ Melendez, I don't have tremendous faith in the Royals organization to develop hitters. For me, Prado is given the depth at first base that we talked about, he's a stay away. Maybe not in say a 50 or 60 player roster. Like I would certainly roster him in a deeper league. But if I have 5 minor league roster spots on a 30-man roster in a 16-team head-to-head, such as our league, Nick Prado's not one of those guys for me. You have any additional thoughts, Aaron?
I don't. As I think I've, not said on this pod, but I think, when his K rate came way down, I appreciate the fact he can walk, and I think I compared him to Reese Hoskins, or like comps are lazy, and I say that, and they are. But like when I think about someone who has a high K rate, but who also walks a lot, gets on base, and has power, that's what I thought of. But I think he's a better athlete than Hoskins. So again, I think that's lazy, but I think that has value, but I think it just limits your ceiling when you don't have that hit tool.
Mhm.
And so I don't, that's the way I interpret. I want to see him repeat it either at the highest level or in AAA before I would buy in to see, like, can he hold that strikeout gain? Is there really something that changed? Or is that just a one season, jump? Not dissimilar from what we talked about Olsen, that kind of thing.
I also think it's worth considering in a league like ours, if you don't keep Prado, what are you keeping instead? And who's available to you in the first couple of rounds of the draft at first base? So if, as an example, if you're going to keep another prospect at a more premium position over Nick Prado, and then you have the ability to draft a Brandon Belt or a Reese Hoskins, I would go that route 10 out of 10 times. If you thought that Hoskins and Belt and Walsh and even a Mancini are going to be kept in our league, and Prado was your way to get into that next tier, then I might consider it. But for me, it's not just do I keep Nick Prado, but it's what else do I have as my last couple of keepers, and what do I think is going to be available to me in the first couple of rounds. And for the record, I would keep Vargas 10 out of 10 times over Prado. That's just me.
I agree. That's where I'm at.
That's good. I'll be sure to pick
Tino,
Prado in like round 3.
Pasquantino is interesting, and I have them at the same tier. And another podcast have said that even KC is kind of going back and forth between those two. But Pasquantino's metrics are crazy. So his I at AA was 80. I mean, his I at in the minors was 87, and then moving to 119 as he moved up into AA. Contact rate at 87%, and then the exit velocity is also strong with 90 to max to 116. So he's really showing up there. His splits aren't that divided, so I find that interesting as well. So Prado, Baseball America has Prado at 55, and Prospectus has him at 55. And then when it comes to Vinny, he's at 50, and then Prospectus has him the same as Prado at 55. So, right. So there's an interesting take there. But again, I see your point too with lefties coming up. How much is that going to be a platoon with Vinny, right?
Right. Well, it's fascinating because, Prado and Pasquantino are both left-handed hitters, right?
Yes.
And I think in part because of Pasquantino's profile, and, he's walking as much as he's striking out. He's 24 years old. He's plodding. I question whether we typecast him as your 300 at bat, 350 at bat, like, Travis Shaw, Seth Beer, Rowdy Tellez sort of left-handed slugger at first base, but because Prado's a better athlete, we don't talk about him in the same breath. Whereas I think like Pasquantino has a higher potential for longevity as a hitter in the major leagues because he has less of a platoon split, because there's less swing and miss, because he's got more control of the zone. And I think we do tend, at least for me, I guess I tend to typecast or stereotype a player into a specific role without actually knowing whether he fits that role or not. Mm-hmm. Because their profiles are actually pretty similar outside of the swing and miss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Pasquantino is one of those players in a dynasty league that you would want to draft, not necessarily keep, but right. Draft and see what happens.
Right.
far as that goes. And this will lead to, if you invite me back for the third base discussion, this would lead to Jose Miranda as well, because you have elite contact rate, but not just at AA, but AAA. And what do you do with these players that maybe are, ranked in, 70 to 100 in Baseball America, mainly because they don't go across all the skills that scouts are evaluating, yet their fantasy baseball score is going to be much higher than how they're scouted.
Right. Because their hit tool or bat to ball or power is the carrying tool.
Yes.
I totally agree. I think it's super fascinating. Aaron, do you want to start us off with our open forum question?
Yeah, I would. Before I do that, I want to bring us back to reality, though, with a couple of thoughts I've had about our discussion about a major league first baseman. I appreciated the way that each of our respective viewing, like what we see live and the games we watch and how that affects our rankings, like what you said about Matt Olson and how when he comes up, how you view him, or like me seeing so many of Josh Bell's at bats. And, I just, that adds a lot of nuance and interest to these conversations for me. Also, I didn't want to let it slide what you said about Brandon Belt. I think, there are 3 players of interest for me on the Giants, Belt, Ruff, and Wade, each maybe with a little different skill set. Ruff as an absolute master against lefties, his velocity, hard hit rate, and barrel rate, and he improved against righties last year. You did a good job subbing up Belt, and Wade also flashed some nice power, speed. But the way, they're Tampa Bay West, so especially in our league, how to manage that from day to day is a headache, but I think there's value to be had there. But man, how do you day to day manage 3 first basemen potentially? I know Wade plays some outfield as well, but anyway, I just didn't want to let that slide by because they were so good last year and they obviously know what they're doing. So that was just something else that jumped out to me. Anyway, so my question.
Baseball, just on that note, fantasy baseball platforms need to consider platoons better because of the fact of what would happen with a player like a Ruff or the Giants during a game, or Tampa Bay during a game, right? And that's the downside of platoons, right? They're going to give you 2 to 3 at bats if you get a switch during the game, especially with the way pitchers are coming in quite early. So I wish fantasy baseball platforms would consider having that option where you could have 2 players that fit in as one at a position.
Right. I couldn't agree more.
It's interesting.
It is. And it's hard to, because you don't know the specifics for each league, it's hard to speak to that in general terms. But, as we spoke about with catcher, you can find tremendous catcher production if you're able to manipulate the platoon splits effectively. And to your point, I look at Brandon Belt, and there's no way I don't want Brandon Belt on my team. It's just up to me to figure out when to play him and why.
Yeah.
So Aaron,
I have one more thing, and I'm going to shut up and ask my question. So you challenged me on Matt Olson, and I think you did a great job, and you challenged Matt Lombado, and I think you did a great job. I would challenge you a little bit on Abreu, and I would use your own analysis against you in this argument. So you are very firm with OPS carries the day, like OPS. Go look at Jose Abreu's OPS year over year.
Sure.
He consistently posts a lower OPS. So while, again, he's my number 7 first baseman, I agree with what you said about lineup and RBIs and his ability to put the ball in play in the situations. I would challenge that he should maybe be a little lower based on his OPS and how important that is in our game, and also at first base. That was one of the reasons I lowered him despite his track record of posting and being in the middle of the lineup. So
sure, I think that's valid. I think that sometimes for me, when I'm doing rankings, my own players will blur the way that I see another player, another position. Abreu, for me, because of who I have at shortstop and in the outfield, is a more valuable player because he drives runners in. Because that's a skill set that I'm looking for from my first baseman. And so I should certainly qualify my rankings by saying, I think that while RBI are incredibly valuable, they're even more valuable for me because of who I have on my team. Understanding that I can carry OPS in other places in the same way that other people think about steals. But I also,
Fair.
even if
I like it.
his OPS is substandard for a top 5 first baseman, his other stats have been so consistent that if I can go into the season knowing that that's a stat that I need to carry, known is more valuable to me than the unknown.
Sure.
But,
Very good.
but point
Anyway.
taken. Absolutely point taken.
So my question tonight was about the utility spot, because looking at, I've been doing some work of looking at, what is the replacement level player at each position. Our league utilizes the utility spot where we can play any hitter. We have a very few players this year. Only Shohei Ohtani and Cruz, if he doesn't retire, will be DH only. Can play in that spot. However, as you guys mentioned, Juan Yepez potentially this year. And then if we potentially get our game going this year and there's a potential of the NLDH, I think we could see more DH only players. So with that as a factor, and just in general, I would love to ask you guys, with your experience in head-to-head, how do you view your utility spot in terms of your roster construction? Do you avoid having a DH only player, or have you avoided that in the past? Or do you kind of hey, this guy is the guy I want in my util spot. He's my, my 9th hitter. Or do you guys just try to get as many talented guys as you can? And hey, whoever I can't get in, they go to util. If that makes sense. I'm just curious, given you guys' breadth of experience and head-to-head, and how you view that spot, any changes or thoughts you've had as we go through, potentially getting more DH only players, and how you would look at those players if we do.
Go
I
ahead.
think it depends on whether the hitter's elite or not, right? So Tani, David Ortiz, Cruz late in his career for me would be teetering between the two. I like having the utility as being that flexible place. So if you have, so for example, there's somebody in our league that has both Turner and Bichette, right? And so you always have that flexibility with utility. The only problem, again, I wouldn't blame anybody who has a Tani or a David Ortiz, but when you have somebody that isn't necessarily at that tier and they're stuck at that utility position, then you don't have that flexibility of shooting somebody in that position like a Bichette or Turner, if somehow in your planning you have both of those players at the same position. And I think that same person in our league also is pretty stocked at second base too. So even the switch of Turner to second base for the Dodgers didn't really help. So yeah, I like that. I like utility as flexible place, unless I have an elite hitter that no doubt I would want there.
Okay.
I'd also add that for me, having a player in our league, having a player at the utility spot that does not commit errors is incredibly important, because errors are one of our kind of wild card statistics. If you play a shortstop and it counts as one of a number of statistics, right? Just as important as home runs or steals or OPS or RBIs, I think it's short-sighted to play a shortstop in your utility spot, because for all the value that he could provide in 3 categories, he might completely tank you in 1. And so for me, the utility spot is, I think Matt's points are well taken. You want versatility. You don't want someone who's stuck there. You want as elite of a hitter as you can possibly have, but it's not, for me, it's not a shortstop. It's not a third baseman. It's probably not a second baseman, because of the threat of tanking an entire category because I chose to play the wrong position in my utility spot.
That's a great point, Tino. And when Matt mentioned that, that is one thing that not only did I think of it, it actually happened.
Mhm.
The team that he referenced there, Matt, that you referenced, he performed very poorly in errors. And so when I looked at that, I was like, well, he's playing two shortstops.
Right.
And so that, I mean, that did play out. So I think that's a very astute forward on your part.
But again,
Yeah.
I think to push back there, it all goes back to distribution, right? And we could say the same thing with steals. Is the shortstop a 30 error shortstop or a 10 to 15 error shortstop? And how is that going to have effect? Or even third base, right? Is this a terrible third baseman is going to have 30 plus errors, or is this a third baseman you could rely on? So I think that comes in as well.
I would disagree though,
Because
because
those errors aren't going to distribute in a consistent way if you're talking about 10 to 15 errors,
we'll say you're,
especially in head to head.
let's say-
I would argue more for I would argue your position more for roto, but with head to head, those aren't going to distribute in a way that you're going to have any control over.
let's say you're a 15, what's the difference between a 15 error shortstop and a 2 error first baseman? Right? It's not, to me, it's not the difference in shortstop to shortstop. It's the difference between shortstop to first baseman or shortstop to outfielder.
But still, that's pretty random when it comes to distribution. You're talking to somebody who the year that I most recently won was because Abreu made 2 errors in the 9th inning during a playoff game in our league in the 9th inning, right? And it's still a funny thing, and I think he was from the utility position.
Bobby,
But again, to me, I don't think that's so much strategy as it is just randomness.
see, I disagree, because 4 errors total on your team can lose you the category for the week, right? Our teams don't
Oh,
come,
absolutely. Yeah.
don't.
But
commit that
again,
many errors.
I-
So if you're talking about, even if
I don't
it's,
think those are going to distribute that way, though.
but even if
It's
you're
very
even if
random on
it's
how they're
uneven-
going to
even
distribute.
if it's uneven distribution, you're talking about 25% of your total score in a category over the course of a week that you can potentially prevent by not starting a player at a certain position, right? And so to me, that, unless you're talking about like a 90th percentile hitter at shortstop versus a 60th percentile hitter at first base, the difference is entirely too much for me, unless he is incredibly fast and steals bases, which changes another, short category.
Yeah, and to me, that's Turner and Bichette right there.
Yeah. Cool. Obviously I asked great questions because it's invoked a lot of passion. I didn't expect that. Yeah, I would argue too, like, yes, it's random to Matt's point, but also to your point, we're trying to minimize the randomness by making the best decisions we can.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it is a round ball and a round bat. So, yeah. So let's go to another question because it's getting late.
So my question, just quickly for you guys, do you have a favorite ballpark that you've been to or that you want to visit?
I recently moved to Pennsylvania. I am really eager to see PNC Park. And so I guess that would be my answer. I haven't, my favorite one I've seen is Dodger Stadium. It was very beautiful. It was up, they always say it's in Chavez Ravine, so I thought it would be like in a valley. Apparently, I don't know what a ravine is because it's up on a hill. You go up on this hill, so like overlooks LA, and it was just beautiful. And it had an old timey baseball feel. It was just wonderful with the organ and everything. But yet it still had the grandeur of an MLB stadium. So that's my favorite one I've been to. The one I'm most eager to see is Pittsburgh, just because I've heard it's a beautiful ballpark and it's relatively close. So I'm really eager to go see that.
Nice. How about you, Matt?
Well, this goes to a bucket list thing for me. I'm disappointed that I never saw Pink Floyd with Roger Waters, or never had the guts to go to a Grateful Dead concert. I missed out on my bucket list. Michael Jackson, same thing, missed out on my bucket list. But one thing I didn't miss in my bucket list, when I was living in DC, we traveled to Boston and went to Fenway. And why this is key is because it was pre them winning the World Series and breaking the curse. So we had to split up. I was with my sister-in-law and my wife. We all had to have 3 separate seats. and I was down along the third base line sitting next to a drunk Boston fan that was very bitter that they still haven't won. He was the grandson of the original ticket holder, and talking about the whole heritage of that ticket and why it was so important. So for me, if I could die with that memory, I would do it. I hit the bucket list there.
It's awesome.
Nice,
Love it.
nice.
I've been lucky enough to go to, I went to Candlestick and what I call Pac Bell, Petco, Wrigley, Comiskey, Fenway. I lived in Chicago for a while. I had some incredible times at Wrigley. Mostly, we don't remember all of it. There's slightly more beer consumption at Cubs games than there are any other games that I've been to. But my most memorable, outside of the Mariners, which I just don't count because it's my team, my most memorable experience was at Candlestick. I saw the Bay Area Stock Exchange is what they called it. It was Will Clark, Matt Williams, and Kevin Mitchell. And Kevin Mitchell was one of my favorite players at the time. And I remember, being so cold that as big of a baseball fan as I was as a kid, I kind of wanted to go back to the house that we were staying at because it was that cold. And the stadium was, your old cookie cutter 80s stadium, but just a really incredible memory. And I could relate it to all of my dynasty baseball cards and, Adley Hammaker and Scott Garrelts and Robbie Thompson and, Terry Kennedy and all the random giants on that team. It was just super fun for me. But I really enjoyed that quite a bit.
It's awesome.
Do you guys have anything else to add to this podcast? We'll go ahead and
I
do.
wanted to give my question here.
Yeah, I would say, what's Matt's question?
All right. So what's your biggest regret when it comes to a move, maybe in the past 10 years with fantasy baseball? And I'll give my biggest confession here. When we moved from Yahoo to Fantrax, my number one pick was Trey Turner, and I traded him to the said team that we've been talking about. Biggest regret. And a lot of it has to do with the emblem. Again, I talked about at the start here that I just couldn't get into the Nats. They didn't have, there's something about a kid, like with your grandma's cookies, and that's already associated in your mind, your neuro associations as far as this is it. Same thing with, I'm a Browns fan, the shiny helmets, the Expos with the logo, and Turner was on my favorite team, but he just didn't come from that era with a logo. So my biggest regret was trading Trey Turner.
Nice. Mine was actually my trade with Aaron last year, trading Max Scherzer for the rights to Elijah Green and Josiah Gray. I'm going to cut Josiah Gray this year. Elijah Green is a cool guy to have, but not worth giving up a couple years of Max Scherzer. And Scherzer, Flaherty, and Robbie Ray would have looked real nice going into next year. Go ahead, Aaron.
All right. This is tough. Can you guys hear me? Because I passed my timer. I want to make sure to deal with that. I don't know what's going on. I had 0 issues last week. I don't know what's going on. Okay. So this is a tough question, Matt. I'm going to choose one because of what I learned from it. So one of the things that I'm working on just in my life is when I make mistakes, taking a step back and really understanding why and trying to learn something from it, and really looking at those setbacks as opportunities to get better. And so one of the things that's really impacted, I think, improved me as a GM. I traded Bo Bichette when he was a prospect in exchange for, I think, round 1, pick 2, and then as well as a pick at the end of the first round. I regret that move, not only because Bo Bichette fulfilled his promise as a prospect, but also the player that I used to pick with that pick was Malik Smith. And the reason I did that was
Malik's with them.
Malik's with an M. He was projected to steal over 40 bases that year. It was my second year in Dynasty. I needed speed, and I convinced myself that I had to have that category, and that this was the only answer.
Mhm.
And so I made a decision against my better judgment. I undervalued, the value of that prospect. I told myself it's just a prospect, and I got the pick back at the end of the first round. I thought, Luis Urias was in the pool. He also played middle infield. He had a similar type profile, a little less speed, maybe a little bit more power. So I thought, I could get Urias to replace him. I get this pick. I have to have this guy. I have to have this speed. And so what I learned from that is I can't overvalue a category. I need to stay with the process. And I need to have confidence that even if I don't get the player I want at that spot, that I can get it other ways, to be more resourceful, be more flexible. Because when I put myself in a corner where I have to have someone, I make a bad decision.
Mhm.
And so I really try to use that as to be a better GM and to be better, sharper trader and just a better manager. I've tried to take that regret and learn something and just learn that lesson and the decisions I make going forward.
This is like a confessional at the end, right?
It is to a certain extent.
But the one of the morals, what was that to our said player? Was that to Aaron?
Yeah.
Okay, so don't trade to Aaron's, I think is the moral here, right?
Sometimes I don't remember specific trades I've made with him, but I feel like I've made a couple
Well,
there.
I was mentioning our Aaron here too, right? Because your Scherzer trade was to him.
Yes, anybody named Aaron is what you're saying. Nice. Well, this was awesome. I look forward to second base next week. Second base should be a little bit more or a little bit juicy, specifically with the prospects. And hopefully Aaron will come with 10 prospects at second base for next week.
Yeah. And Tino, Max is available. So if you want him back, you know where to find me.
I've got Josiah Gray and probably a slightly lesser prospect than Elijah Green to offer. Thanks a lot, you guys.
All right, thank you for coordinating.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.